Hi, it's Shannon here from houseimprovements.com. We're out here at the cabin build again, doing some framing and that, and trying to get you some videos. And we've got a chunk of wall here with a nice big window in it, and we thought it was a good opportunity to show you all the different bits and pieces and how they all work together to make a basic window opening. When you're framing a wall, you're just about always going to frame it flat on the ground. It's going to be the easiest. I mean, there's the odd time where you might want to be framing vertically, stick by stick, but most times if you have a flat surface to work off of, this is what you're going to want to do. So you've seen my video already for laying out the wall plates, which is actually this chunk of wall is what I did in that video. So if you've watched that video, some of this should be a little bit familiar. If not, just go back and watch it. We'll throw a link probably in the description of this video for that video. So that's the layout that we'd used, and we've now gone and cut all the various pieces that we need. I'm not going to go into great detail on the sizes or anything because depending on your window and your situation, your wall height, all that, your situation could be totally different. The basic gist of it is that with any window or door opening, you're going to need a header up above to support any weight that's, you know, from your rafters or the story above the one you're working on. Now this header we've fully assembled, and we also have a video for that, so again, I'll throw a link in the description. The main idea of the window opening is you're going to have a header. The header needs to be supported by these pieces, which I call trimmers. Most people in the US call them jacks. So they're supported by these jacks because the header would sit right down on it, and the jack sits right down on the bottom plate of the wall. So that weight is being transferred right to the bottom plate. Whether there's a rafter or whatever out here in the middle of the window, it's that header's job to transfer that weight down and over. If you had a really heavy point load, your header sizes and stuff will be all different. So again, we're not going to talk about the header size in this case. So transferring the weight down to the header, but you're also going to need to determine the bottom of your opening. And then that is going to have a certain amount of weight on it from the window itself, but doesn't need an extra header. It just needs a base plate or a sill supported by other studs, and they're going to still be spaced out on the exact same centers that you were using when you laid out the rest of your wall. And in my other video I kind of talk about that as well. So these are still, we're using 16 inches on center, so we still have a regular 16-inch on center spacing, even though the window, you know, adds some extra pieces in between as well. Okay, so your sill is supported by all these cripples, which are then transferring any weight down onto the bottom plate. Now, in this case, over here, when all this stuff is lined up and nailed, on this end I've got a bit of a space here because this is where one of my 16-inch centers happen to work out, and this is where my trimmer or jack and my regular stud are here. We have a bit of a space, and it's close enough to this end that I'm not worrying about adding another piece in there, which in a cold climate like ours just allows more convection of the cold right through the wall. But over on this side, I'm just trying to get things roughly lined up here. So over on this side, our regular stud position was actually right here where this trimmer is. So we've had to cut that off, right, because it supports the header up there. We moved our full stud over to the outside of it because we always need a full stud right beside any trimmers or jacks that goes all the way to the top plate. And then because there was going to be such a large space between here, I just added this extra cripple in against this one here, so it'll pick up the end of the sill. Otherwise, all we would have had is the sill nailed into here, which in most cases would be fine, but this just gives a little bit of added support just in case you have an extremely heavy window. This end of the wall, I'm not going to talk too much about this far end of the wall because this is actually just a piece of a much longer wall, and there's another door and stuff starting there. In the video, we're just mainly going to talk about the opening here and what to do with this part of the wall. When we had our plates all laid out, from there we could determine what we needed for bits and parts. And as you can see, we've cut them all, and everything's just sitting here loose, ready to go, other than the header is all nailed together. And I just wanted to do it that way to start out with, so you can kind of get an idea of all the pieces before they're nailed together, because sometimes it's hard to tell what's what when everything's tight. So at this point, I'm going to start nailing some of the parts together, just to show you kind of the progression of which pieces get nailed first, sort of thing. And then we can move right on to sheeting part of this wall, just to give you an idea, and cutting the window opening out. On a window opening, kind of the first thing I want to nail together, I want to determine where this sill position is on my jack or on my trimmer. So I can either measure or just pull everything up tight, put a pencil line on each end. Do we have one longer in here or what? I had some really excellent help today, so I'm not questioning it, but something seems a little, oh, I'm wrong. I guess I'm wrong. Just felt like there was one that was longer than all the rest here. It must be that bottom plate is a little crooked. So I just want to squeeze everything together. I'm marking a line on here at the top side of this, this plate. So then what I can do is lay these ones down and actually nail that plate into place on that line that I just marked. The reason it's nice to do that is because once these two are nailed together, which they're going to be, I need super long nails to get into here. So if I nail this first, it's not an issue. And if you have too many things in the way before you do that, then you're just fighting everything else. Right now everything still moves nice and easy. So I'm flushing up here. You can't see it, but I'm putting my sill straight with the line, the pencil line that I just marked. 3 nails. And you're going to run into this situation fairly often, because not all our lumber is super straight. Actually, that's a good point. It's always nice to have any of the framing on each side of your openings to be some of the straightest lumber you have if possible. Just keeps you from having to fight when you're doing your window install and getting things flushed up. But the situation I'll go back to is this here is higher than out there. And for whatever reason, maybe there's a bit of a crown in this piece. I can't push it down to get it flush, but I can pull this one up. So I just usually use my little red bar as a bit of a shim under there. And generally it's enough to do what I need to do. So those are normally the first 2 spots I like to put together. And sometimes I'll even just take that whole basic window assembly, the 2 full studs on the side, the 2 jacks, the header and the sill, and I'll just take them right out of the way and put it together, and then if I've got extra hands I can just carry it and set it in place. So I nailed those in, so now that part's at least started and secure, and now I can nail the trimmers to the full height studs. So same idea. I want to start out with the 2 members here flush to each other on the bottom. I can just lay that down so you can see. So I want to get flush on the bottom and flush on the top. And then because this is only 3 inches thick total, and I'm using 3 1/4 inch nails, if I put them straight through, obviously they stick out on the back side, and the more nails sticking out, the more chance you're going to jab yourself on them. So if you just drive them at a slight bit of an angle, they won't come through on the other side as often or at all. So flush this up, come up about 3 inches from the bottom, put a nail in, and you can see I didn't come through the other side. You should always keep your hands back a little bit though. You know, you don't want to be nailing like this, because if that nail does come through and poke you, you're not going to be happy. So with 2x6, I used 3 nails attaching the sill into here. On this attachment here, I can just use 2 nails per row and go about every 16 inches will be sufficient. So I'm just working it along here and keeping these 2 flush. And I'll just start with 1 row of nails all the way along first till I get it flushed up, and then I'll fill in the other ones. And this one's working out pretty good. It's staying pretty flush. So I got that. Now I can put in my other set of nails. I'm just spacing them about 1 inch or so down from the edge of the 2x6s. Okay, so I got that one. I'll do the same thing on this side. It's especially important inside of the window or door openings that your nails don't come through on the inside, because they're just going to give you hassle all the way through installing your window and everything. So that's kind of the first couple steps. Now the next thing I can do is get my header slid down, sitting on the jacks, and I can nail it in through the full height studs on the side of it. I'm not too worried at this point that everything's sitting straight or square. It's got to be relatively close, but for right now that isn't quite as important. So I'm getting the bottom plate of the header down as tight here as I can on the jack, and as well flush on the top here and tight this way. Now I've got a little bit of space there, so I can usually manipulate this to get that a little tighter, preferably. So I just lifted these so that I could twist the header a little bit, and that closed that up better. And I put 3 nails into this sill of the header, and we've got a 2x8 header, so then I'm going to put 4 nails into each ply of the header. We've got 2 plies in this case. Just rinse and repeat on the other end. My header's got a little bit of a lip right here that's higher than the stud, so I put the bar under the stud again so I can get a little weight on the header and get it down. So now we've basically got the framework of the actual window opening done, the outer framework of it, and that's what I like to start with, just because, like I said, you kind of need to have some space to get the nailer in there and that to nail from the edges. The next thing I'm going to do is line up my bottom plate and nail all my studs or cripples or whatever I've got along here into the plate on the appropriate marks. So on the end of this wall I've got a full length stud. I just need to flush it with the end of the plate, flush it with the top here, and put 3 nails in. So with 2x6 I'm always using 3 nails. Helps if these are relatively sitting nicely in the right spot. Okay, so now here I'm to my jack and my full stud at the window opening. So again, I just got to line them up with the right marks. Get everything flush. And these are all my cripples underneath the window. This one we just had over at the edge. Make sure I bring it up flush. And you notice I didn't nail it in the bottom, I just need to get it nailed to something there. These ones I'll nail in the bottom and the top. Okay, a couple more on this end. When you're cutting your studs or any of these components, it's always easier to put the crown up when you're working on the floor like this. And by crown, I mean, if you look down here, you can see that this is a little bit banana shaped. Or which way do I need to move it? Can you see down that side and see that it's kind of got a little bit of a banana shape? So that's the high side is the crown. So we always want to put it up. You can see these arrows on here. Mark an arrow on it, so if it is crowned and it falls over, you know which way you need to nail it back in. The reason if we're framing on the floor that we put it up is if I put it down, then the the crown part is hitting the floor out in the middle and you're trying to rock the whole wall to get things flushed up. Where if it's already off the floor in the middle, I can just simply lift it or whatever I have to do to manipulate it. Okay, so I've got everything along the bottom nailed. I can go to the top and do the same thing. Okay, so now at that point, what I've got left for cutting is, now that I've got the header installed, I can actually measure this space at both ends. Hopefully it's the same. And that'll be what these little blocks above the header will be. So we need to put those in as well. So I've got about 2 7/16 and 2 7/16, so we should be good. So I'm going to cut those and then we'll come back. Okay, so we cut our blocks and got them nailed in here. Now when you're cutting these blocks, it's important to measure at the ends here and use that measurement, not just measure each one. Because if you come out here and measure this one and this plate isn't straight, it's up or down, and you cut the block to fit that, well, now your top plate isn't going to be straight. So you know that it should be the same distance as top of header to top of this full length stud. So those are the best 2 spots to measure from to get that length. We just put them in, nailed them. Normally you should nail into your header as well, like I would usually normally toenail. In our case, we've got the foam, which I don't think I talked about in this video, but if you watch the video where we build the header, I've got 2 plies of 2x8 down on the bottom, which will be the inside of my house. And then I've got 2 inches of foam and some 3/8 plywood taking up the rest of the space in the header. So anyways, if I toenail here, it's just going into foam, not holding anything. Once we stand the walls, I'll just have to remember to go back and toenail where I can actually toenail into some wood. We got everything nailed. What I'm going to do next is I want to get the wall straight and square before we put any plywood on. So normally to do that, what I would do is I would have a chalk line snapped on the inside edge of where my wall is going to sit, and I would just simply drag the wall over to that and pull the bottom wall plate straight to it. Put the odd nail in if you need to get it to stay there. Because that's back behind the camera and not convenient, we're just going to snap a line on the floor here randomly, and then I'll pull the wall to that. Just like 3 inches short of that plywood line there, Dad, or so, approximately. So the chalk line is the easiest way to get a straight, true line. 2 string points, the string's going to be straight between them, or it should be. So I'll just pull my wall down to that chalk line. Okay, I'll just start at this end. So I've got it lined up here. Actually, I'm a little off at this very end, so I'll start right there. So I've got, you probably can't tell from the angle of the camera, but I can see my chalk line just on this edge of this plate. So I'll just nail this down temporary. Just toenail that in there. And I'll go around, depending on how straight or crooked your lumber is, you might not need many. I'm just going to go about every 4 or 5 feet here. It's actually pretty nice. Okay, like that. As you've seen in lots of my videos, the best way to get something that's square shaped or rectangular shaped, the best way to know if it's square, like actually true, is measure your diagonal corners. And if the 2 diagonals are equal, then your corner should be square. So we're going to measure that. So I'm going to hook right on this outside corner over here, right on the corner. And now I've got again, because this end of the wall is a little goofy, I've got an exact measurement, a mark here that's the same on both ends, and that's what I'm going to, but normally you would go to right to your corner. So I'm measuring 164 right on, right there. We'll see what this diagonal measures. $164, and I've got 163 and 3/16 or so here. So this diagonal is shorter than that one, so I need to increase it and shrink the other. So I'm actually got to pull this top of this wall. We've got the bottom nailed, so it shouldn't move. I'm going to pull this my way, and I'm going to get it to about 163.5. And then I'll double check, but that should be pretty close. It's important to always hook the tape the same way on both your corners, and you're measuring as accurate as you can. So I went 163.5, and I'm at 163 5/8 this way. So I can come just a hair more. Should be really close now. Yeah, there's 163 and 9/16. Doesn't matter what the measurement is to you guys, as long as they're the same. Yeah, 9/16. Okay, so we know now, everything should be sitting square. We should have square corners and everything. So I'm going to put one nail in the top just to keep it from moving. Oh, we didn't put our top plate on. I'll put my nail here. That'll just keep it sitting there in case we kick it or something. So I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm going to put my double top plate on. Generally your outside walls are going to have a second plate on them. Preferably any joints in those plates, you should try to line them half up so the joints are half on a stud anytime you can. So if you have to have a joint, just don't randomly throw it anywhere. So yeah, so I'll do that off camera. It's just a matter of cutting another 2x6 and nailing it on there. And what I do is I nail with 2 nails at each stud into this plate here. Okay, so we added a piece of our double plate. I've got a space here because this is just part of a longer wall, so I want the double plate to overlap onto this from the next section, so we're leaving part of it off. Our next step is, now that we got it square, is we want to start putting our sheathing on our plywood, in this case OSB. Now normally, depending on your situation, you might be able just to take your OSB. Remember, we straightened this bottom plate. So depending on what your situation is, you might be able just to flush the plywood with the bottom of that plate all the way along. Get it the right distance that you want here and nail it off. In our case, when we stand these walls up, we're wanting the plywood, we want this plywood hanging off because we want it to overlap down onto the ends of the truss system, the floor system. We've determined what we need hanging off, and I snapped a chalk line here. Instead, for my first row, I'm going to line up the top edge of my first row with that chalk line, and whatever hangs off is what we need to overlap our floor system. The other thing I'm doing is, when this wall stands up, it's going to butt into another wall that's perpendicular to it. So this will be the end stud of the other wall when it's all standing. So I want this plywood to overhang the 5.5, which is the thickness of my other wall. And then that way, that gives me another opportunity to lock the corners together when that gets nailed off, once the walls are standing. So when I laid out this wall, I accounted for that as well, so that my 16s should work out. We'll see. So I want my plywood sheathing to hang off 5.5 inches. In this case, I've also started with, this was a 4-foot piece of plywood, because I want to kind of stagger my joints from row to row. Now around this window, it really probably doesn't matter that much, but it's just good practice. And then you're always kind of doing the same thing. So it'll take a little bit of playing around here with this, but I've got a piece of 2x6 right here. So that's my 5.5 inches. Now I could measure it too, but I'm just using that as a gauge to get my plywood hanging off the right amount off this end. And I've got to get it lined up with all this up here as well. And it should end up halfway on that stud over there. Looks like it did. I'm doing something right. And I'm going to put one nail in that corner. Now, just to be sure that things are going straight, I'm going to measure my plywood overhang here to the bottom of the plate. I've got 11 and 9/16, and just make sure it's the same here, and it's not quite. Okay, just because we're starting out with such a small piece, just to try to make sure we get it square. I can put a nail there and we should be good. So now it's a little trickier this way because now we're kind of guessing where our studs are. Most of these OSBs will have some kind of lines that, if you're laid out properly, should line up with your either 2-foot studs or 16-inch center studs. So it's these ones here that I'm trying to get lined up with. And I know my plate, my bottom plate, here's one nail, here's the other one, so my plate runs along here. This is all much easier if you're flushing it up to the bottom, so I've just complicated it for you, doing it this way. Here's my sill, so I know I can nail there. I know I can nail here. And I'm just going to make sure that this stud is in the right position. So I know if I come up here and measure what I should have, so that is a 16 from this edge to here, happens to be a 16, and it's good where it's sitting. Same thing with this end one. I want to know 27.25 because it could be kicked in or out. Yeah, and it needs to go out actually a bit. So now when you're nailing your sheeting off in a 4-foot width like this, you're basically going to have a nail at each edge, and then 3 nails in between there is what you typically will do on normal studs. When you get to a joint like this here, so you're going to have another sheet up against it, you're wanting a nail about every 6 or 8 inches on each piece of plywood. I'm going to nail off this piece and then we'll put on a second sheet. So this next piece I'm going to put on is a full sheet, 4x8 sheet. So I'm going to bring it down, butt it to that one that I just did. Bring it up, make sure it's on my chalk line. And you should normally have just a little bit of space between your sheets. Just gives them a little bit of room to grow if they get wet. So I'm just fine tuning that. So you can see, I don't know, I basically could stick a nail between there. So say 1/8 of an inch. That's my plate right there. Remember, we have that overhang back there. So I can come over here, nail that, and again I want to check these measurements here. I know this can't move because it's good and sturdy. So if I go to there, that's 12 and 22. 12, actually those ones are sitting good. So for some reason these marks aren't working out on this sheet of plywood. It's got goofy lines on these plywoods. Normally it's like a red or a blue line. This has just kind of got these dots. That's all right. We know we're 16 on center. That joint was centered on a stud. So I know that basically my studs, if I hook in there, should be 16 on center. Okay, so we've got that one on there. Now remember, that's our window opening in there. And you notice that I didn't nail off these studs that are in here because it'll be easier to do once I cut this window out. But I want to kind of get all my sheets on before I go cutting a whole bunch of stuff out, because it'll just be more helpful if I've got solid pieces to get my sheets all straight again. So I'm going to make a mark where the edges of my opening are, so I have something to go by later. I'm going to measure down to my sill, 9 1/8. So my sill's down here. Just so I have some guidelines to snap lines to later. Now, we have 8-foot walls. Well, they're 8'1" actually. But because we've hung our plywood off to catch the ends of our rim joists or our floor joists, that means that 2 rows of plywood isn't going to be enough height, right, to cover our whole wall. So I'm going to put a band of narrow in between full sheets. The reason I want to do that is so that when I put my full sheet on, it comes up and spans over my window. And that all gives my wall some strength, some shear strength, racking and everything. Because if I just put my full sheet of plywood on there, in this case my 4 feet just makes it, I'd be nailing a little strip into there, and to me that's just not enough strength. So if I add these in down there where I don't really need the strength for that, that means my 4 feet's up here, and I get a nice wide piece to nail across the window, and my sheets will add some strength to this opening. So I will nail these little strips in, and again I'm leaving a little bit of a gap between. Did I not nail there? I must not have. So that's kind of what you want. You want the nails just flush or just below the surface. You don't want them, you know, driving in so far that they're halfway through the panel already. If they are, then you should have some adjustment on your nail gun to you know, back them out a little bit. If they're going halfway through, you're blowing through and losing some strength there as well. Okay, so I'm pushing them down to my center strip and flushing it to this end. So I should have my 5.5 here still. Yeah. And then I'm creating just a little bit of a space between the sheets, and I'll put a nail. And I'll just bring this up a bit to get that space. I'm just looking at my gap here, and it's pretty even, so I'm happy. So you can see how this sheet now has spanned way over, you know, the end of my header and everything, all that is over in this area. So now this, when I cut it out, I'm going to have this big long arm on that sheet that's going to help give some strength to everything, you know, in the wind and that sort of thing. So I can tack this all down, and then we'll cut out the window. I'm not going to actually put that piece on, and that's because that's going to overlap into the next chunk that I'm not doing. So I'll tack this on, cut out the window, and finish nailing all the sheeting down. Okay, so we had pre-marked our plywood. I'm just going to put a nail in there and snap a line. Give myself a line to cut at for cutting out that window. And I'm just using this square. So get that out of there. This piece up here is 35 3/8. So I'm going to mark this same thing there. We'll snap another line. So this is all just to get my window cut out. For this other one, I can just measure this. Oops, 63 1/4. None of these measurements mean anything to you because yours is going to be different. Okay, so I should have all my lines I need in order to cut this out. And I'll just adjust my blade just a little, cutting a little deeper than what the thickness of the plywood is. So then I'm just going to go and finish nailing off all my studs everywhere where I didn't nail already, because I just kind of tacked it down before. So I can see where the nails are here in the sill, so that gives me a good idea where the stud is. So now I would just want to remember to pull these nails when you're done sheeting, and then they aren't going to give you hassle when you go to stand the wall up, but I can do that after. So I think that's really all I can show you as far as what to do framing a wall where you've got a window in it, and then sheeting around the window and cutting it out. I think I caught all the high points anyways. So like I said, we've got some supplementary videos that kind of go along with this, dealing with laying out the plates, cutting and assembling the header, that sort of thing. So you're going to want to have a look at those for a little more detail on those particular things. So I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe to the channel, click the thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next one.